there. If you have curly hair, then frizz is probably the bane of your existence. And if it's not that dramatic, then it's at least something that's mildly annoying. But it's probably closer to the first one. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I'm a licensed hairstylist with over 20 years of experience. And on this channel, I use those 20 years of experience to help you have healthy, happy hair. So, as I was just mentioning about frizz, that is going to be the topic of today's video. I'm going to talk a little bit about what creates frizz, and I'm going to talk about the different stages of your styling process where you could potentially get frizz and how to maybe troubleshoot some of those problems and maybe change that so that you can work your way towards a more frizz-free existence. And I'm also going to talk about what is a normal amount of frizz. And I'm actually going to start with that one because frizz is normal. If you have curly hair, you're going to have frizz. There are no two ways about this. If you are able to ever achieve a frizz-free wash day, it doesn't usually last. And even like the people on Instagram who you see have absolutely perfect hair and it looks like they have no frizz, they have frizz. They either edited it out or they know how to turn their head so it doesn't show up as much, or it's there but you don't notice it because it's not your hair. And that usually is the biggest one, is that you're not noticing frizz as much on other people as what you do on your own, which means that other people are not noticing your frizz as much as what you're noticing it. So even though I'm going to talk about different ways to kind of calm the frizz and to reduce it, it is something that in the long run, if you start to learn to accept that frizz is just going to be a part of your life, it's going to make things a little bit easier on you. Because it's normal, it's part of having curly hair and it's not going away. So embracing the frizz is definitely a good way to go. However, that being said, there are ways to reduce it or to minimize it throughout your days as you go from wash day to wash day. Let's talk about what is a normal amount of frizz. Now, this is actually going to vary from person to person. And I know I say that a lot on here, but that's because it's true. Everybody's hair is completely different. You can have any combination of anywhere between fine hair and coarse hair, anything in between. You can have high density hair or low density hair, anything in between. And then you can have, wavy hair to very tight coily hair, anything in between, a multiple group of patterns of anything in between. And then you can have different combinations of all of the above. And then there's also the condition of your hair or porosity, and that can affect things as well. So the amount of frizz that's going to be normal is going to be different from every single person. And then also, like I said on my video about coarse hair, about the common misconceptions about coarse hair, is that if you have coarse hair, it's more easily seen with the naked eye. That means it's more visible when people are looking at you. So each individual hair strand that's sticking up here in the form of frizz is going to be more visible. So it's not that you necessarily have more frizz, it's just that it's more easily seen. And that is something to also just take into consideration and keep in mind, that just because it looks like you have more frizz than somebody who has finer hair doesn't mean that you actually do. So let's talk about kind of normal amounts of frizz for overall pretty healthy hair. And if you look at mine pretty close up, I have frizz. I just did a wash day and I used a gel that I'm trying new products, and I used a gel that didn't have a cast. I tend to get less frizz when I use gels that create a cast. This one did not. So I have a little bit more frizz than what I normally do. And when I use gels that have a cast, I have less than this. However, I still have frizz. I very rarely have a wash day that doesn't give me any frizz whatsoever. So for me, what's a normal amount of frizz is just kind of a little bit up here usually, maybe some in through here, but mostly it's these little short hairs, my new growth growing up off of the top of my head. They're working their way away from the rest of my hair and creating a little bit of surface frizz or halo frizz, whatever you want to call it. It usually just kind of sits up around here, and most people get that who have curly hair. It is largely because of, like I said, the new growth that's growing out, because each of your hair strands is in a different phase of growth. So you've got some shorter pieces that are starting to grow in up here, and because they don't have the weight of length to pull them down and help them to kind of group with everything else, they start to pull away and kind of do their own little thing up here, and that's typically what you see, and that is most definitely normal for, you know, hair that is overall pretty healthy. Now, if you have hair that's been damaged or is very fragile and has broken off quite a bit, you're gonna have a lot more of those shorter hairs, so you're gonna start seeing a lot more frizz. The other thing with damaged hair is that things that ruffle up your cuticles, so bleach, high lift tint, or heat will do it. So if you're using too much heat on your hair and, you know, concentrating it in one spot for a very long time and causing some heat damage, those things tend to ruffle up your cuticle. And the rougher the cuticle is, the more friction there is in between strands, and that will also cause frizz as well. Friction causes frizz. So friction of your hair against your clothes is going to cause frizz, and friction against your pillow when you're sleeping is going to cause frizz, and friction of the hair strands moving against each other is going to cause frizz. The healthier your hair is and the smoother your cuticle is, the less friction it has, so it's not going to frizz up as much as somebody who has bleached their hair and they have really blown out cuticles. Those cuticles are going to rub against each other and aggravate each other and frizz up, and they'll get caught on things, and there's a lot of friction going on there. So you will see more frizz if you have bleached or damaged hair. And a way to help kind of combat the friction problems associated with damaging your hair is to try to restore your hair's health by using deep treatments, protein treatments, bond rebuilders, to get your hair as healthy as possible. And then conditioners are designed with a pH that helps to flatten and smooth out your cuticles. So definitely using conditioners and leave-in conditioners will help. And same thing for using like moisturizing curl creams and other products that have emollient ingredients, and then also occlusive ingredients to kind of help seal that down to decrease the friction between the hair strands. Now, another place where you might see frizz, aside from once your hair is all completely dried and styled, or after you've slept on it, or after you've been out in the wind, is you're going to see frizz sometimes during the styling process, so wet frizz. And if you see wet frizz, you're definitely going to have frizz when you're dry. It's just the way that it goes. The smoother your hair is when you start the process, the less frizz you're gonna have at the end of the process, so long as you're minimizing that frizz throughout the entire process, or trying not to at least increase friction and aggravate it and cause frizz throughout the styling process. So one of the things that I see for having wet frizz is like kind of what I did actually on a video just a couple of videos ago, or a video ago. It was my Uncle Funky's Daughter Curly Magic video. I didn't know how that product was going to lay on my hair, and especially combining it with other things, I didn't want my hair to get really producty feeling. So because I was kind of unsure about that, I used the Curlsmith Weightless Air Dry Cream, which for me is usually just a leave-in. I never use it as a curl cream because it doesn't work as a curl cream for me. For some reason, I thought it was going to be different this time using it with that product. It wasn't, and I noticed I had some wet frizz starting at the top of my hair, but I didn't notice that until I was actually replaying my video back to edit it, and then that's when I happened to notice that I had a lot of frizz already starting, just because it wasn't an emollient enough product, or it didn't have enough stick to it to get my hair to clump together and stick together and stay together in its little curl groups instead of separating. So it was able to separate pretty quickly because it just wasn't enough. My hair requires some products that actually have a little bit of weight to it to help it kind of stick and clump together. And when I'm talking about stick, I'm not really talking about sticky. I'm talking about it because of the feel of it and the emollients and the creaminess of the product, it causes it to kind of just stick together. Whereas lighter weight products and curl creams tend to not do that so much with my hair because it's just too coarse, and I need something that's going to put a little bit of weight on my hair so that these little shorter pieces will kind of be weighed down a little bit instead of flying around up on the top. So that is one common way that you can wind up with wet frizz while you're styling your hair, is to be using incorrect products for your hair type. And I do have a video about selecting products for your hair type, and a little bit of a hint, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with your curl type or your curl pattern. It actually has more to do with whether or not your hair is fine or coarse. And then other things factor into it as well, but the biggest thing is whether or not your hair is fine or coarse. So finding the right products that are going to help stick your hair together, clump it together, and kind of pull down some of those flyaway bits, those shorter pieces, kind of pull them down with the rest of your hair, is how you kind of combat that. However, it's a fine line for some people, because some people have very easily weighed down hair. So while trying to find a product that's going to help them control the frizz, they could wind up going too far and have a very weighed down, flat to their head hair. So that's a little bit trickier to try to find one that works. However, there usually is one out there that will work, or it could be a matter of mixing some products together to try to get one that works really well. I'm a big fan of layering products, but I'm also a fan of cocktailing products, and if you're not sure what I'm talking about there, I did do a video on cocktailing products versus layering products and talked about some of my different combinations that I like to do. Another way that I've seen people get wet frizz is when they style completely upside down and they'll brush through their hair and they get clumps started, and they keep their hair super wet to get these clumps going, and they have some nice big juicy clumps, and then when they flip back up and they start shaking their head out and trying to get it all settled in there, and because it's settling in a different way than what it was brushed, it's gonna start pulling away. The clumps will kind of start separating a little bit, and a lot of times when that happens, you kind of see a web in between there because you're kind of pulling these things apart, and there's like a web of hair that'll get caught in there, and that can turn into some frizz as well. Not everybody has an issue with that. Some people also might like that little bit of web of frizz, especially if it stays close to the roots, because it does give a little bit more volume. And people who style upside down they tend to be doing that because they're looking for volume and to get their hair up off their scalp. So that might be a plus for them. But if that's something that if you style upside down and that's something that you notice is that you tend to get a lot of like wet frizz and webbed frizz, that might be why, and you might want to try to consider doing a different way of styling if that frizz is bothering you. Another reason you might wind up with wet frizz is because you're manipulating your hair too much as it's drying, or it's drying too quickly, or you didn't start with enough water. So water is extremely important at the beginning of the styling process to make sure that your hair is clumping together and helping to reduce the frizz. Because as you're starting to move your hair around and manipulating it, if your hair is too dry at that point, or if it's in the process of drying, starting to dry, it's going to create friction, which, as we've established, friction creates frizz. So what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna make sure that your hair is good and wet. And for everybody, the amount of wet your hair needs to be is one of those things that, again, is completely different. I always found that when I was behind the chair doing people's hair, that wavier hair and looser curls needed to be wetter than tighter curls. Not to say that tighter curls could be styled like practically dry, because that is absolutely not the case. But I always found that wavy hair and loose curls tended to do a lot better. And I was much more able to coax the waves out of the hair in an almost frizz-free manner with the wetter the hair was with waves and looser curls. And then the tighter the curl, the less I would have to worry about that as much. But again, there are other factors that come into play, and I would adjust based on what I was seeing when I was working with their hair. And one of the ways that you fix this, if you find that your hair is starting to dry and you're still brush styling or you're still raking products through, is just make sure that you're keeping it wet throughout the styling process. Keep a water bottle, a water spray bottle nearby, and just spray your hair down, and that is definitely going to help keep it wet and keep the frizz at bay while you're working on it, because like I said, as it dries, it starts to increase friction as you're manipulating it and working it. You want to start working with your hair when it is really, really wet, and then you want to go through the process with it still pretty wet and keeping it as wet as possible. And then once you're done with brush styling or raking or however it is that you style your hair, then you want to leave it alone and not be manipulating it, touching it, or moving it around from that point on until it dries. Because if you don't do that and you do manipulate your hair, or it gets blown around, like if you're out in the wind and you're letting it air dry, then it's going to move around, it's going to create friction, and it's going to kick up some more frizz. So keeping your hair very wet while you're working with it is key. Keeping your hands out of it while it is drying is also just as key. And on the topic of drying, I definitely suggest drying your hair as quickly as possible, because you have the most control over what's going on if you dry it quickly. When you're letting your hair air dry and you're kind of having to sit around the house like this and not move because you don't want to mess up your hair and get frizz, and you're just, that to me is the whole reason why I diffuse, because I am not about that life completely sitting still to try to dry my hair and not get frizz. I find that I literally have to sit completely still, otherwise I'm moving around too much. Or the other thing I tend to do is I flip my hair back and forth, and air drying for me always creates more frizz, just because it's subject to me sitting still, it's subject to me not going outside, it's subject to how much humidity might be in the air. There's just too much in the air, and it takes too many hours. And I would much rather dry my hair very quickly using a diffuser and having most of the control over how my hair is going to dry, as opposed to just letting it dry on its own and seeing how it's going to end up. So my recommendation is definitely to use a diffuser. And also the nice thing about diffusers, it does exactly like it says, it diffuses the air, so it spreads it all out. It's not in a concentrated stream where it's just blasting your hair all over the place. It's blowing it out all over and not in one spot. And you can hold it further away, you can hold it closer up, you can put your hair in it. I do have a video on how I diffuse my hair. I generally start by hover diffusing with my head upside down, and I just hold it some distance away and just hover around, and I keep it moving so that I'm not, because I do actually dry my hair on high speed and high heat. So I keep it moving so that that heat isn't getting my hair too hot in any one spot for too long. And I just kind of keep it moving all around. And because there's a diffuser on there, it's not like I'm blasting the hair, so I can move the diffuser around at that distance and it's not going to cause a lot of frizz. And because I like to use gels typically that create a cast, I like to hover diffuse until I feel a cast. And that is one of the reasons why I absolutely love working with gels that give me a cast, because once that cast is there, it's there and it's gonna hold your hair in place. Just like a cast on a broken arm holds your arm in place, that cast on the hair is gonna hold your hair in place. And you're not gonna have to be as careful about what you're doing with your hair as it's drying. You're still going to want to be careful. You're not going to want to go in there and start, manhandling the heck out of your hair and expect it to be frizz free, but you can start handling it a little bit more. And one of the things I do once I feel the cast is in there is I bring the diffuser kind of in towards my scalp or even on my scalp and start drying at the scalp. I'll push up on the bottom with my open palm and I dry my hair in here. And the reason I lift up is because my hair is heavy to start with. When it's wet, it's even heavier. And if I don't kind of lift it, it's going to dry very stretched out. So I like to lift it, but I don't like to put it in the bowl and bring it up because I feel that that distorts my curls and make them curl wonky. So I tend to just lift up enough to get the weight off, and I sit and hover diffuse, and I get my roots to my mid lengths done first, and then I go in at the ends because those dry fastest anyway. So that would be my other tip, is to diffuse your hair and to learn a routine for diffusing that works really well for your hair to get it dry very quickly without causing a lot of frizz. Oh, and one thing that I forgot to talk about when I was talking about wet hair and wet frizz is brush styling. And I did mention trying to make your hair as smooth as possible to start with. I highly recommend using a brush. I've done it on several of my videos where I brush through, and I find that that works really well. I do it from roots all the way down to the ends, and it gets rid of any tangles or potential tangles or anything that's kind of starting to just get roughed up, or the friction is starting to work its way in there. This way it gets it completely out of there and smooths it down, and you've got a nice smooth canvas to start with when you are styling your hair. Because like I said, the smoother your hair is when you start the styling process, the more likely it is to be less frizzy when you are done. So now that I've put that back in there, and kind of out of order, sorry about that. Like I said, I completely forgot about that one. So moving on to where we are in the process of drying. So now you've diffused your hair, and if you've chosen a gel that has a cast, then you've got crunchy hair, which I know a lot of people don't really like the crunchy hair. Like I said, I like it because that cast is just like a cast on your arm. It holds your hair in place, and it'll keep it less frizzy while it's still in the cast. And you can just very easily break up the cast, and then you've got some nice soft fluffy hair. There's no more crunch, but it has significantly less frizz because of that cast. And there are a lot of people who will leave their hair in that cast over the next several days and let it work out on its own so that it can hold the frizz down. It really is a good, effective way to hold the frizz. If you don't like wearing a cast in your hair for several days, that's completely fine and understandable. So one of the tricks that both my daughter and I do to help with frizz is to keep the cast in our hair. We'll wash our hair in the evening, and we'll keep that cast in our hair overnight. And then when we wake up in the morning, we scrunch out whatever's left. We both find that some of that cast works its way out overnight, and then there won't be as much of a cast the next day. And like I said, whatever's left, you scrunch it out, and then you have some nice, soft, fluffy curls that now no longer have a cast, but it has significantly less frizz than what you would have if you went to bed without a cast in your hair. And I have done it both ways with the same products multiple times, and I always find that sleeping with the cast in like that definitely helps me get frizz-free or minimal frizz curls for a lot longer than if I do my hair earlier in the day and I scrunch out the crunch and then go to bed with no cast in my hair. I tend to have more frizz on day 2 that way than what I do when I do it the other way. So that is another tip for handling your frizz, is leaving the cast in, but if you don't want it for several days, leave it in overnight and then scrunch it out in the morning. That also is a great way to handle some gels that leave such a hard cast that you have a hard time getting all of that cast out of there. If you leave it in overnight, I find that by the next day, a lot of that stubborn cast has worked its way out. So you just have a small amount left, and then you scrunch it and you go. So that's a great way to handle something like that. And the specific gel that I'm thinking about right here as I'm talking about that is the Curlsmith In Shower Style Fixer. That has a cast that goes on and on and on and on. And I find that that is a really good way to try to get that cast completely scrunched out. And now another trick for managing frizz, both while your hair is wet and then also while it's dry, is hairspray. I tend to use hairspray on my wet hair just before I diffuse, and I find that this really helps hold my hair. I get a lot more hold out of all of my products that way because I get the hold from the hairspray, and the hairspray really helps keep frizz from forming, because hairsprays dry really fast usually. And even though I use working sprays, which tend to dry not as fast as aerosols, it still dries faster than some of the other products. So even before I start to get a gel cast, that hairspray has already dried and it's held my hair together and without the frizz before it even gets a chance to start forming frizz. So that is a trick that I absolutely love to do. It's not a trick that I've been doing a lot lately, only because most of the time I am trying products for review for the channel and I don't want to put hairspray in it because that is going to affect how my results turn out. It's not going to show me much about what the products can do on their own when the hairspray is helping them with hold and with frizz control. So that's the reason why I haven't been doing it, is because of that. But otherwise, I would absolutely still be putting hairspray in. When I do my hair and I'm not filming a video, I 100% put hairspray in it before I dry it, just because I like the extra added insurance of the hold, and because I know it's going to really greatly reduce the amount of frizz that I have when I'm done drying my hair. So now another way that you can use hairspray is after your hair is completely dry. This is the more traditional way that you think of to use your hairspray, is to spritz it on to hold it in place. I find that this works really well for humidity, is to give a good spritz afterwards. And it is something that I used to do when I lived in a humid environment. I would spray it before I would dry my hair, and I would give a final little bit of a spritz on at the end when my hair is dry, just to kind of help hold everything in place and to make it more difficult for the humidity to affect my hair and cause it to fluff up, puff up, frizz out all over the place. And as any of us with curly hair knows, humidity definitely causes frizz or makes frizz worse. And in large part because that moisture is getting into your hair strands, it's causing them to start to swell, and that's raising your cuticles a little bit, and the little bit of raised cuticle is causing more friction. The swelling is causing everything to kind of puff up and do weird things. So that's where a lot of that comes from. And sometimes it'll seem like you've got tentacles that are just going out and searching for moisture in your hair, especially if it's really dry, and it just wreaks havoc on your hair. And one of the best things that you can do, which is, you know, keeping your hair nice and smooth at the start, keeping it wet throughout the styling process, keeping your hands out throughout the drying process, and then adding hairspray either before you diffuse it or after you diffuse it, or both. So this is going to conclude my video all about frizz. Hopefully you found this helpful, maybe picked up a tip or two on how to help deal with frizz, or maybe learned that frizz is not quite so bad as what you think, and that it is part of normal, natural curly hair life. So hopefully I inspired you to maybe embrace the frizz, along with maybe kind of manipulating things so you don't have to deal with quite as much frizz. So if you like this video, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. If you'd like to see more content like this, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell while you're at it. And if you have any questions, any comments, or anything that you'd like to see, please go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching. Bye.